Well, I'm really excited about this one. Asha Rangappa, we've been meaning to do a Substack Live for some time. Very excited that it's come to fruition. Asha and I used to work together at Just Security when I was a fellow there, based at NYU Law School online journal. I was covering the Trump trial there, and I'm sure a lot of the folks logging on right now are subscribers to her newsletter, the Freedom Academy, as am I. You've seen her all over cable TV, including my former employer, MSNBC. She's a former FBI counterintelligence agent and an assistant dean at Yale University's Jackson School of Global Affairs, and we've got a lot to talk about, particularly about that last part of your CV, Asha, because there is a lot going on in the realm of Donald Trump's attacks on education.
Yeah.
And before we actually get into this particular topic, I just want to announce the breaking news. Earlier today, a federal judge denied a request by the Trump administration to avert a trial on on a constitutional challenge against their targeting of student protesters under the First Amendment. So that will go to trial. It's going to trial in July. But before we go to that, I want to take a step back and get a kind of broader picture of things and refer to Asha's great post on Freedom Academy recently about the bigger picture about what Trump is doing in the realm of education. So, uh, why don't you just break down what you wrote about on Friday? Because I think it really sets a stage for what happens when the government investigates academia appropriately and
Yeah.
when the system works.
Yeah. Being at Yale, I know a little bit about that because I was employed here when Yale was the subject of a 15-month investigation by the Department of Education under Title IX, and specifically about the ways that it was handling or mishandling um, instances of sexual assault and harassment on campus. And I think it's just a great example of start to finish how something like that unfolds on a college campus when there are like when there may be civil rights violations, and how a legitimate government inquiry would work in that kind of situation. And it involves in this case, it was the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education, but it could involve the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Um, Initiating an investigation, coming on campus, interviewing people, talking to administrators, getting a handle on what is happening, what is not happening, identifying places where there may be compliance issues. And now look, the Department of Education and the federal government at that time that was under Obama, I guess theoretically had the power to pull federal funds, but that would have been the extreme consequence if Yale didn't, cooperate in an investigation or didn't take steps to remedy things. The goal was to bring Yale into compliance. And so the DOE worked with Yale to essentially overhaul its procedures and create this university-wide system, which is now in place. And I was actually a member of that disciplinary committee for about 6 years. Um, that's how it goes. And then, there were, you know, dozens of other universities that had similar investigations. All of them complied. None of them got their federal funds yanked, as far as I'm aware. And what I was pointing out in my Substack is we're in this, uh, you know, sentence first, verdict afterwards era where there are no investigations. I mean, when we look at this college campus stuff that's happening, whether it's pulling funds or canceling, access for Harvard to bring in international students, or the student visa revocations, they're just all on conclusions that, there's terrorist activity, that these students are supporting terrorism. But no, we don't know how or who has arrived at these factual conclusions.
Hmm. And it seems like it's very analogous to Trump's attacks on big law, where you have these executive orders saying that these firms did these bad things and go straight to punishment. And in your post, you started out with that great scene from Alice in Wonderland, the Red Queen. This is We're now in the court of the Red Queen. So would it be fair to say that if this were a legitimate investigation, and for folks who are watching this Substack live, if you're talking to friends who might think, oh, maybe there's something to let's say you're talking to friends or family who believe what the Trump administration is saying about Harvard University or any other university or the students. Uh, it goes to the principle here, right? That if this were done correctly, if there was something to these allegations, the way to do it is through an investigation that could take 15 months and then have a process. It,
Yeah.
it
Well, and not only that, if this was really the problem that they were trying to address, but also if it was a problem they really wanted to solve. Right? Because the
right.
investigation isn't just about uncovering fact, it's also about tailoring a remedy that's going to resolve the violation that's happening. So let's imagine, and it may well be the case that there are there's pervasive anti-Semitism on Harvard's campus, or even instances that are violating students' civil rights. That's a problem. That should be investigated by the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division, or the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education under Title VI, I think would apply to that. Um, of course, the Trump administration has dismantled the civil rights divisions of the Department of Justice. And I don't even know if it's even functioning at the Department of Education, which kind of, you know, highlights the entire pretext here, because obviously the entities that investigate this kind of thing don't exist. But also pulling funds from, medical school doesn't, like, I don't understand how that actually solves the problem, or how Harvard is supposed to know what it has to do to address the purported issue that exists.
Right. So it sort of gives away the game. Let's turn to the breaking news that I mentioned a little earlier. A federal judge has told the Trump administration, no, they cannot avoid a trial coming up in July next month, and the targeting of student protesters under the First Amendment. So far as I can tell, this is going to be the first trial to attack it on a policy level, not just simply Mahmoud Khalil or Rumeysa Ozturk or Mohsen Madawi challenging their detentions on their own terms, but going at the heart of the policy. What's the significance of this ruling?
Yeah. So as you pointed out, in those individual cases, what we had were habeas petitions, right? It was challenging the legality of their detention. In Miss Osterk's case, the judge, ordered her release. And I'm not sure exactly what's happened in the other cases. But as you mentioned, so this one, and thank you, Adam is a great resource for like breaking news, because I actually didn't even know that this happened today, and I was like, oh wow, like what but this was filed by the American Association of University Professors, and the plaintiffs are actual professors who feel threatened as well, right, because of their activities that they're listed in there. Um, the significance here is that for the student protesters, and I outlined this in a Substack a couple of months ago. All of these different people who are being, detained and deported, they're happening under different authorities. The ones for the students is happening under a provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act that gives the Secretary of State the discretion to essentially remove someone who is here on, a visa, J-1 visa, if they are interfering with the foreign policy of the United States. And this is what Marco Rubio is using. Now, it's really interesting. If you go to this section, it says that the Secretary of State has the power to do this. He can't do it for First Amendment activity. And then it kind of gets circular, and it says, unless he determines that it's interfering with a compelling foreign policy interest. And that is what Marco Rubio is using. And basically, the challenge here is, so what is any kind of protest or any criticism of Israel, is that interfering with foreign policy? And where does that and that would be like a direct viewpoint, discrimination is what they would argue. What's interesting, Adam, is I don't know if how many times that particular one provision has been invoked. I think the last time it was invoked was in 1995. Under the Clinton administration, Secretary of State Warren Christopher tried to deport someone to Mexico, and this was a whole issue with that involved politics and stuff. But the judge who ruled on that case was Trump's sister, and
Marion Trump Barry.
yes, and she said that that provision was unconstitutionally vague. I don't think she reached the First Amendment piece, but she said it's vague, and I'm interested in that wasn't, or I didn't get all the way through the complaint. Maybe they did allege void for vagueness, but in other words, again, like how would you know what conduct to avoid that would not interfere with the policy of the United States? So it'll be a really interesting trial. I am surprised that it's going to trial so quickly.
Right, absolutely. Well, it's a bench trial, so they don't have to worry about jury selection. One of the things that I've found very interesting, and I've been following all of these student protester cases very closely for All Rise News, and one thing that's been a constant is the judges saying they have seen nothing in the records other than speech. There isn't an allegation that they're somehow compromised by a foreign government. It's just simply in the case of Rumeysa Öztürk, she co-authored an op-ed, or so and so participated in a student protest. And it's if you look at the kind of precedence of that section that Marco Rubio is relying on, it has been about cases where speech is not necessarily the conduct at issue. And so it's these cases are very interesting. It'll be fascinating to see what happens in July. I want to get your reaction to something that the judge said today that we reported on. Judge Young, he's an 84-year-old jurist appointed by Ronald Reagan, and he seemed pretty taken aback by the manner of the arrest. Folks here may have seen the viral videos of some of the arrests, and he said this: "I'm not accustomed to law enforcement officers without identification approaching individuals masked and, not having a warrant or being able to display a warrant, having only an administrative order." What's been your reaction to these videos and what's been going on at college campuses, the targeting of these students?
Yeah, I mean, it's, coming from a law enforcement background, it's really disorienting and alarming, because it's obviously not a best practice, right? Like when you get trained as a law enforcement agent, the most obvious thing is you have to identify yourself immediately. And that's actually for your own safety and for the safety of others. Because if you're walking around with a big mask over your face and no other insignia saying who you are, and, grab somebody, particularly if you are carrying a weapon, if that person thinks you're a rando trying to attack them and they get a hold of your weapon, like this is like bad news for everyone, right? So it's always like identify police. When you go for an arrest, even if you're wearing plain clothes, you wear your badge hanging on a lanyard so everybody can very clearly see. If other first responders come on the scene, they can identify you. So this is all it's rogue. It's rogue, and it's to me, it is not only designed to intimidate, but also to, I think, disorient. I don't really understand the purpose of it, and I think it's very disrespectful, I think, to law enforcement generally, because when you erode trust in, one law enforcement entity, you're essentially making it harder for everyone to do their job. And so I'm not, the fact that ICE is doing this without any kind of it reminds me of, when Russia sent the little green men into Crimea, with no insignia. Like you only do that if you are kind of trying to get away with something that is like illegitimate.
Right. Well,
Or you're not playing by the rules. Do you know what I mean? And that is the point. So, I find it, and I've seen actually other FBI agents on LinkedIn who've been posting similar things, that it's just, and obviously this judge is not loving it either.
right. Well, that's a fascinating perspective as a former FBI counterintelligence agent. That I want to get your perspective from the same framework on a different case that happened last week. It's coming to another hearing this week. It's a case of Yunseo Chung. She's a Columbia student, another one of these students who's targeted for deportation for her protest activity. And in her case, it's a very interesting thing because she has not been arrested. And so she's currently in hiding. And the judge, a federal judge in New York, proposed a solution. The Trump administration could simply give a notice to appear to her attorneys in court. And that would initiate her proceedings. She would have all the rights. She would be spared the trauma of the arrest. Now, what the government said after that is, well, I'll have to check in with ICE. They might want to, they might have a different approach to trying to initiate the proceedings, meaning they might want to have ICE simply arrest her. What's your reaction to that? Why would ICE want to go through the actual process of arresting an individual who they can put into custody and avert an impasse, that they're at an impasse, they can't find her, but they could actually start their actual objective, which is a deportation proceeding, by serving her attorneys or mailing it to one of her known addresses. That would start the process.
I mean, the only reason I can think of is if the spectacle is a part of the whole thing. In other words, and that's what I see here, and Ruth Ben-Ghiat talks about this in Strongmen, right? That strongmen need to make spectacle. They need to like depict their show of force. And so I think, frankly, ICE loves it when they show up masked and ambush somebody and it gets caught on video and circulated, because this is sort of the we can get you anywhere. And you won't even know who we are. You won't even be able to tell what kind of car we're driving because we'll just pop out of the bushes and, no one will ever see you again. I mean, again, this is kind of like, Latin America circa 1970s kind of stuff, right? And it's not something that you would do if you are legitimately interested in the outcome. I mean, just from a resource perspective, like, hey, like this person is being represented and these lawyers, like, in other words, she's on her own recognizance that she's going to, like, if something needs to happen, like they will comply. I don't think there's any question that would be the case, right? Like she's not trying to abscond into the country and evade law enforcement. It would be as extra as if when Trump was indicted, if they wouldn't let him turn himself in and insisted on, if the FBI insisted on going down to Mar-a-Lago and, arresting him and handcuffing him. I mean, you only do that if, either it's absolutely necessary, which in this case it isn't, and in Trump's case it wasn't either, or if you want to have a visual that is showing your base, what you're doing, and kind of, it's sort of like the 2 minutes hate in George Orwell. You can kind of then, use it as sort of agitprop for base. That's what I think.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting that in Yoon Seo Chung's case, she isn't even accused of a crime like Trump was was charged with very serious crimes. Either way, it would be problematic to do it. And the government it seems to be resisting a very easy solution for their stated goal of deporting her. And so, to your point, maybe that's not the goal. I want to kind of pivot here to something that's kind of to the core of All Rise News's editorial mission. One of the things that we focus on is if people are alarmed by stories like these, what can they do in terms of civic engagement? Let's talk about the attacks on academia. What is something that if someone's looking at the attacks on Harvard or student protesters, what's something that they can do from your standpoint as someone working for Yale University, as what people can do to support academic freedom?
I mean, I think first just kind of standing in solidarity. And look, it pains me as both a Princeton and Yale grad to have to root for Harvard, but I'm doing it because the principle here matters. It's not a football game. It's not a basketball game. So I think realizing, I think that it's important. We've seen this in other contexts too with the law firms. Like, you must stand together or you're going to hang separately, right? And it's going to come for, you might be like, oh, Harvard hoity toity. It's going to come for your research hospital, at your college town university if it has one, which, by the way, there are several in like red states, even, and public universities that are going to, uh, face this kind of wrath as well. Um, you know, I guess if you're inclined to donate, I mean, I know that at all these universities, alumni giving is up because, people who, I think I saw one person who was actually a Harvard grad who was like, I've never given money to Harvard. And here I just wrote a check. So, that I think if you're inclined to do that or to support the lawyers who are doing the litigation on behalf of these people. I don't know. What are your suggestions? I'm not, it's tough, right? Because it's like, this is a legal fight in some ways.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I saw one of the commentators noted the No Kings protest, protesting kingly powers that Donald Trump is trying to anoint himself with in many of these cases. I know that there have been phone drives that folks have been calling their elected representatives to see what the legislature can do about it. But to just pivot slightly to a different topic, because there's always so much breaking news in a day. We've found
Yeah.
a another piece of breaking news is Trump's defeat in California in another Alien Enemies Act case. And as folks here might know, most federal judges, save for one, have ruled against the administration on the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime statute that's been used three times in U.S. history before Trump: World War I, World War II, and the War of 1812, and has been found to be illegal in terms of this proclamation. Trump's proclamation has been ruled illegal by a number of judges. The latest is a Trump appointee in California. Your reaction to this particular tranche of litigation? Where is this going? It's obviously bound for the Supreme Court again. There's been a preliminary ruling on an issue there.
So I thought that this was only like a quasi victory because it sounded like
Right.
the judge was not going to second guess the Trump administration's determination that there was an invasion. And I think that's the substantive question that this is going to come down to, right? That this judge agreed with the other judges about requiring notice, and that you have to give people notice before you round them up pursuant to this authority. But I think we're going to quickly need to just get to the question of whether um, is the question of whether we are being invaded a legal question, or is it a factual question that can only be determined by the executive branch? And I have been talking about this in my Substack, in my national security law primer, which I did, which is whether it's this or the student visa stuff where they're claiming that these are Hamas supporters. All of these invocations of national security, of terrorism, of foreign policy, these are all arenas where the executive branch has traditionally gotten a lot of deference, if not, just a complete hands-off approach from the courts, depending on the context. And I think that's what the Trump administration is really counting on here. And this is where this is what Stephen Miller is trying to suggest, that these are all sort of core executive branch authorities, and when judges start to question them, they are infringing. And I think it's a much more nuanced and complicated question. But yeah, I guess I was not super not unimpressed. I wasn't that impressed with the analysis, but I'm just saying, like,
Mm,
I wasn't super excited by the California thing, and I didn't see it as a total loss because of
right.
the fact that this judge was willing to um, credit the invasion.
Right. Your point is well taken with that. It was sort of a mixed ruling to give folks the other side of it. There was the ruling blocked the due process free expulsion of the plaintiff, like a number of other rulings. But the kind of broader question
And
here
a class,
about
right? And a class of
I,
privilege.
I
Is that
I
right?
believe so. I need to kind of look at the ruling a little
Yeah.
more closely, but that's been the general pattern here. And no judge, if correct me if I'm mistaken here, has said, "Oh, sure, there is an invasion." The breakdown, insofar as there have been any judges willing to entertain the AEA theory of the Trump administration, has been, "Okay, we can't second guess you." But most of the judges said, "Yes, that's within our power, and there's no invasion." Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and in fact, I think the one judge that actually went all the way and said there's no invasion was a Trump appointee, right?
Correct.
In Texas,
Correct.
who was like, "What are you talking about?" And I think people need to understand that this is really what the Trump administration is banking on, that the Supreme Court is going to, at most just say, we can't second guess this, because if this is an invasion, if this migration is an invasion and, there's like terrorists coming across, that is a perpetual state.
Mm,
Do you know what I'm saying? This isn't a
absolutely.
declared war where, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. I mean, what it does is it essentially then allows this expanded power and probably triggers others um,
Right.
in many other contexts, including some of the scary habeas stuff that they are, have been intimating towards. Um, because if they can say, "Oh, we're being invaded constantly," because then that
Right.
just becomes a perpetual state that we're in that will start to justify all sorts of extreme emergency measures. And I am curious whether this Supreme Court is going to recognize that or care.
Mm. And it's, to your point, a war on an abstraction that
Correct.
has not been declared by Congress, and that opens a huge can of worms. You were quoted in the New York Times a while back talking about Trump's visit with Bukele, saying, "I think we're in impeachment territory now." Can you unpack that? And insofar as how everything has advanced in the Alien Enemies Act litigation, if the Democrats retake the legislature after the midterms, um, what would the hypothetical articles of impeachment look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I said that we're in impeachment territory because I think at the point where the government is abducting people without any hearing or opportunity to contest whatever they're claiming about them and then sends them to a foreign prison, even like this is the part that I think is just shocking to me. It's not just deporting them to like the country that they're from and being like, "See you later, like figure it all, go enjoy your family." They are imprisoning them without due
Right,
process, and then throwing up their hands and saying, "You can't make me get them back." I mean,
right,
at that point, if once a court order has no meaning, there is literally no other remedy except to remove the person through, that's the only legal and political constitutional remedy that we have. Um, wow. The articles of impeachment, I don't even know where to
mm.
start. I think honestly, you could probably look at the list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence and just copy those down. One of them is that he's sending people abroad for, trial and punishment without any due process. I mean, that's one of the things. But then there's a number, like imposing crazy, taxes and uh, tariffs or whatever. I mean, it's actually quite uncanny if you look at the list of grievances that the framers had and how many parallels there are.
Right. Well, Asha, I can talk to you for forever. It's been a half hour. I would love to continue talking, but we'll save some topics for the next time. Thank you so much for your time and expertise, and look forward to talking again soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And we'll post this video very soon on All Rise News. Thank you again.